Thanks very much, Nikki. It's great to be here again with you. It's a privilege, in fact, to be speaking to you at our State of Industry lunch, and I'd very much like to welcome our new sponsors, Henry Davis York, especially Nikki Bentley. She's Investment Funds and Financial Services Partner, and of course the HDY team here in force today. I'd also like to welcome FSC Chair Greg Cooper, Deputy Chair Brad Cooper and Director Lochiel Crafter, and welcome to all of our members right across financial services. I would also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. Well, as Nikki said, 2016 is a very important year, both in Canberra and for the financial services industry. It's an election year, I don't need to remind you of that. And while tax is at the centre of the policy debate, we hope this will not be a superannuation election. To be specific, a tax on super election is the last thing Australian savers want. For several months, there has been an intense national debate on superannuation, all aspects of it, from taxing it to the imperative for critical reforms, including stronger governance standards, choice and competition. The news cycle has been dominated by tax and superannuation speculation. Finance journalist Robert Gottliebson recently wrote, "Whether the 2016 election is held in the next few months or later in the year, it will be the first election for decades in which superannuation, lump sums and savings policy are major issues. There has never been a more exciting time to be in financial services," to quote the Prime Minister. It gets even more exciting. Today I'm launching the 2016 FSC UBS State of the Industry report, which confirms that financial services is now Australia's largest industry. Let me start with some facts. Financial services is our biggest sector, larger than mining and manufacturing. The FSC UBS State of the Industry report confirms that financial services has outstripped all other sectors to become Australia's fastest growing industry over the past 2 decades. In the 12 months to 30 September 2015, the contribution of the financial services sector to the Australian economy was $141 billion. That's nearly $6,000 per person for every Australian. The industry employs 451 Australians, 48% male and 52% female. Employment in financial services is concentrated on Australia's east coast, with Sydney the largest employment centre. In the 12 months to September 2015, the sector grew by 4.82%, twice the rate of GDP. And this figure that we're all becoming familiar with, the sector manages $2.6 trillion, which is the third largest pool of contestable funds in the world. The importance of financial services is not just a measure of its contribution to employment and to the economy, but also its role in delivering integration and efficiency in services and products which increase the wealth of Australians, protect their lives and provide comfortable retirements. The $2 trillion superannuation sector underpins our financial services sector. There are 245 APRA-regulated funds and more than 560,000 self-managed super funds. Superannuation is our only truly intergenerational public policy designed to enable us to save for our retirements and relieve growing pressure on the age pension. Australia's 28 life insurance companies account for $44.2 billion. They play an important role in protecting the livelihoods of Australians in the event of serious illness, death or disability. Most people can get insurance cover for life and TPD disability via their superannuation funds. The life insurance industry has made significant progress to bedding down various reforms, and legislation has been introduced to Parliament which will amend the Corporations Act. An industry code of practice will be announced mid-year. These are all very positive developments which will significantly strengthen consumer confidence in our sector. Funds management is another very important part of financial services. This ecosystem, with its $2.6 trillion of funds under management, has enabled the development of expert and innovative asset and fund managers, a world-leading governance and regulatory system, and highly competitive markets. Australia's volume of financial services exports, as Nikki said, overseas investors putting funds into Australian Managed Investments Trust, as measured by our annual FSC Perpetual Australian Investment Managers Cross-Border Flows report, has more than doubled over the past 5 years and now sits at $43.6 billion. However, at 3.5%, these exports remain small as a proportion of total funds under management. If we are able to fulfil our potential in funds management exports and become truly competitive on the global scene, the government must simplify Australia's withholding tax regime, introduce competitive rates and broaden the range of collective investment vehicles on offer. We have called on the government to include these urgently needed reforms in the May budget. Financial advice is on track to transform into a profession. There are just over 23,000 financial advisors and more than 1,300 Australian financial services licensees in this sector. We support legislation to strengthen advisor standards, including via a relevant degree, exam and professional year, supported by continuing professional development and a code of ethics. This will be introduced into Parliament very soon, and like the life insurance reforms, a very positive development which will strengthen consumer confidence in our sector. Our member trustees companies, both private and public, play a very important role in providing services to individuals, not-for-profits and the corporate sector, which include philanthropic advice, complex estate planning, disability trust management, acting as a trustee for corporate transactions, and helping our Indigenous communities to maximise the opportunities offered by native title. Australia has 1,500 charitable trusts, which have a market capitalisation of $4.37 billion. Well, that's the current state of our industry. As another former Prime Minister said, a good set of numbers. The reports are on your tables and I do commend them to you. You can take them away if you like. Let's turn to the issue of the week, the day and the hour, superannuation. In a week where the volume of speculation and uncertainty about superannuation has reached what I'd call peak super, I'm going to focus on why we all need to pay attention. I'll outline why we have super, what it's doing and what we need to do to make it sustainable, effective policy as our society ages and our tax base is cut almost in half over the coming decades. I want to build a strong case for cool heads to prevail in the sometimes febrile debate on tax and superannuation. As I said, superannuation is our only truly intergenerational public policy, the purpose of which is to provide adequate self-funded retirement incomes for all of us, and equally importantly, to reduce pressure on the age pension system, which at $44.7 billion a year and rising at a rate of 7% annually, already consumes 10% of the federal budget. For a policy that's only 24 years old, there's a lot of amnesia about what superannuation is for. Both major parties appear to be looking at ways to tax Australia's superannuation savers. Labor has announced its policy. It will increase the contributions tax from 15% to 30% for those people with an income over $250,000 per annum, and levy a tax on investment income over $75,000 per annum when an individual is in retirement. Quite a bit more tax on superannuation. The government, in spite of promises made before the last election to stop tinkering with super, appears to be considering doing just that. In a speech to last week's SMSF Association conference, the Treasurer said the government would have to make, and I quote, hard decisions when addressing the targeting of tax concessions. While the government hasn't yet given us any firm plans, there's been much discussion in the public arena about tax progressivity and new concession caps, with various models being fed into the debate. Some of them, I have to say, extremely detrimental to Australians' retirement savings. There's one in particular which would reduce super contributions to just a vestige. I call that the wide bother option. Kites have been flying in the media. Last Sunday, there was one to give low-income earners the chance to opt out of superannuation. A very poor idea. It undermines the fundamentals of our system. If one group is allowed to opt out, who will be next? It could be the thin end of the wedge for other wholesale changes to our super system. It would have material impact on many Australians. Some of those impacts may not be immediately obvious, but could be quite devastating. For instance, what happens to insurance coverage for low-income earners who no longer have group coverage in compulsory super? Good news, the government did rule that out. Another kite, thankfully knocked down again fairly quickly by government, was one to permanently freeze the superannuation guarantee rate at 9.5%. Again, poor policy which would defeat the purpose of super. The only way we're going to get to a critical mass of self-funded retirees, independent of the age pension reliance, is to get the SG to 12% as soon as possible. Now, the government has this set for 2025. We urge them to bring it in sooner, by 2022 at the latest. Just on the SG, I can commend FSC member Perpetual for its commitment to adequacy. Some of you may have seen that report in this morning's paper, where they're lifting the rate to 10% for employees and rising it up to 12% by 2020. Wednesday's news cycle was dominated by a kite flown on capital gains tax for super funds. In other words, tax on investments inside super. Once again, a bad idea which would erode savings. Trustees of APRA-regulated funds already have a lower discount than individuals, 33% compared to 50%. If this discount was reduced further to 15%, investment decisions could potentially be distorted and existing investments adversely affected. Any proposal to change CGT on investments inside super funds ignores the tax complexity surrounding the transition from accumulation to retirement phases. All the reviews into superannuation over the past decade, the Cooper Review, the Financial System Inquiry and the Productivity Commission reviews have focused on how to boost returns to consumers after fees and taxes. Increasing capital gains tax on money already invested in super effectively puts the brakes on growth of invested savings and, over time, would have a material impact on the compound growth of a member's balance. It runs contrary to all the hard work and reform implemented already. Yesterday's media story claimed the government is considering a cut to concessional caps to $20,000. Again, poor policy. The concessional caps have already been lowered significantly at $30,000 for most taxpayers and $35,000 for those over 50. Any move to bring this down to $20,000 will particularly penalise older workers who are trying hard to save more in their last decade or so of work. Like other tinkering options, it pushes the goal of self-funded retirements for Middle Australia further into the future and condemns future generations to higher taxation rates to support them. The question we all need to ask is this: why tinker with superannuation? What is the problem that we're trying to solve? Tinkering is a bad idea in itself. It immediately creates more uncertainty and less confidence in the system. I'm sure you've all been talking about it. It's something that I know really affects a lot of people in a particular age range. A lot of people are very concerned by all the media stories. In his speech last week, the Treasurer asked the question. He said, should we direct tax concessions to superannuation in the same way we're doing it now, or should we instead put more money towards reducing income tax or company tax? Is there a better balance we should strike? He asked. I would suggest that the question that needs to be asked is not about tax. It should instead be, how do we get people to save? The National Retirement Savings Policy, otherwise known as superannuation, has little to do with the tax system. Everyone knows we have a tax system. It's confusing, inefficient, costs Australia investment and jobs, and reduces the incentives for many to work. You can tinker with super, but the truth is you will still have a broken tax system. Superannuation changes are not credible tax reform. A credible tax reform is a tax mix switch, but that's a debate for another day. Let's be very clear. The gates have long been closed to stop people stuffing millions into super. Super was never designed as an intergenerational wealth transfer vehicle and should not be used as such. We have consistently said that in the effort to design a better retirement system, the tax treatment of superannuation should be on the table, but it must be considered in the context of a full retirement income review that includes the superannuation guarantee rate, aged care affordability, the age pension entitlement and the assets and incomes test, as well as access ages for the pension and for super. Super must not be rated to fill budget holes or fund pet projects. Early this year, the FSC released PwC modelling on several progressive tax options being debated in the public arena. We did this to highlight what each option would mean for Australia's retirement savings. The results were striking. The policy given the greatest attention at the time, an option to apply a 15% rebate on marginal tax rates, was shown by our modelling to undermine the retirement outcomes for middle and lower Australia, people earning $80,000 or lower, that is 80% of Australians. The FSC does not support the 15% rebate model. This proposal would send the retirement savings of middle Australia backwards and condemn them to higher levels of reliance on the age pension. The only option which did not harm the savings of middle Australia was when the superannuation guarantee rate was raised to 12% and any discount on the marginal tax rate was at least 20%. Now, this model is revenue neutral. No money would be taken from super and transferred into consolidated revenue. If the government does have plans to change super, we urge it to find options that increase, not deplete, savings for middle Australia, and crucially, do not add implementation costs onto super funds and therefore put upward pressure on fees. Superannuation can be made more sustainable, so it can deliver on its long-term purpose. When making a case for a great superannuation system, we need to turn to the intergenerational report. The great weight of demography is bearing down. The baby boomers are retiring. 700 Australians are turning 65 every day. Life expectancy for us is amongst the highest in the world. By 2025, men will be living to 95 and women to almost 97. In that year, there will be 40,000 people aged over 100. In the mid-70s, there were only 122 Australian centenarians. By 2025, the number of working Australians aged between 15 and 64 for every retiree over 65 will be only 2.7, nearly half what it is today, 4.5 people. In simple terms, the numbers of working taxpayers will be reduced by almost half. By 2025, the participation rate for Australians aged 15 and over is projected to fall to 62.4%, compared with 64.6% today. A lower proportion of Australians working will mean lower economic growth over that period. We all know these figures. Survey after survey has found that too many Australians are concerned about not having enough savings for their retirement. There was one put out by the ANU last week which showed that more than half of people surveyed were concerned about this. Research commissioned for the FSC shows that if we don't save more for our retirements, almost 80% of us will still be reliant on the age pension in 2055. And this doesn't seem a great result after what will be more than 60 years of compulsory saving. In the context of this election year, I do want to touch briefly on the history of super and do a stocktake of the system. I think it's a really useful time to do this. Particularly, as I said before, there's a lot of forgetting about what superannuation is and what it's meant to be. Well, super savings and the age pension do have a very long history in this country. The first age pensions were paid here in New South Wales in 1900, and 9 years later a national system replaced state schemes. These were modest, they were means tested, around 12% of male total average weekly earnings. Today the age pension is benchmarked at 27.7% of male total average weekly earnings. Superannuation savings, as we all know, used to be voluntary. Tax concessions were introduced in 1915, deductibility for employer contributions and an exemption for super fund earnings. In 1992, the third pillar of our retirement system, the National Compulsory Super System, was introduced by then Prime Minister Paul Keating. At that time, it covered 72% of workers. As we know, it was a deal to give employees a non-inflationary wage rise, but had a good policy outcome. It responded to the challenge being faced by most advanced economies in the world, an ageing population and a diminishing workforce. Compulsory retirement savings would take the pressure off Australia's age pension system. In 1997, the Wallace Inquiry into Financial Services examined the fledgling super system, which at 5 years old only managed $300 billion and the SG rate was 6%. In 2014, David Murray's Financial System Inquiry re-examined superannuation. In the 18 years between Wallace and Murray, there was, as we know, significant growth in the system, primarily due to the increase in the SG to 9.5%, as well as very strong non-concessional contributions and investment returns. As we know, the system now manages $2 trillion. So where are we now? Is superannuation working? What benefits has it brought to the Australian economy over the last 24 years? Let's start with our savings rate. Our gross savings rate fell significantly from the mid-70s, reaching a low of 18.4% in 1991-92. It remained steady at 21% over the next decade and then began to rise in 2005. By 2011, the national savings rate had risen to 24.8%, significantly above the advanced economy average of 18.5%. Our compulsory super system is, of course, a key structural driver of this savings rate. And as we know, this stock of national savings provided a significant buffer for Australia's economy during the global financial crisis. Our three-pillar retirement system, the budget-funded age pension, compulsory savings through superannuation, and voluntary savings, is unique amongst developed countries. Dr. Ken Henry, in his 2009 Future Tax System Review, wrote, "Australia's three-pillar system provides a system that satisfies the needs of all older Australians, provides the capacity for individuals to enhance their retirement income, and spreads risks between the public and private sectors in a fiscally responsible way." There are forecasts that super funds will grow to at least $8 billion over the next 20 years, firmly establishing the system as structurally important to Australian households' financial well-being. Superannuation currently saves the government and taxpayers more than $7 billion every year on age pension expenditure. It generates almost $11 billion in annual tax revenue for the federal budget. The superannuation system, as measured last year, also enjoys an extraordinary level of public support. We did some research with ING Direct last year showing that 88% of working Australians support compulsory super and 81% say it's essential for a comfortable retirement. The system has lifted the retirement savings of all Australians. It's helped to buffer the progressive deterioration of our budget finances as our population ages by reducing reliance on the age pension. But has super achieved its objectives? The answer is not yet. There are other positive changes we can make to improve the system. In the short term, there are these changes. The superannuation industry has grown considerably over the last 2 decades. It has been forced to evolve and mature. It's not always been an easy process. The system still has vestiges of its cottage industry past, including a protected default system, which is not yet open to market competition. There are still hundreds of thousands of Australians working under enterprise agreements who remain locked out of choosing their own super fund. There are a number of subscale superannuation funds. The government's planned reforms on governance, choice and open market competition in superannuation are the right measures to ensure that consumers are adequately protected and will enjoy the benefits of competition. Australia's superannuation system has recently been rated by the Melbourne Mercer Index as the world's 3rd best. To be the best, it needs more. Its purpose, to raise standards of living in retirement and reduce the cost of an ageing population, must be defined and enshrined in legislation. In the 24 years since the introduction of compulsory super, no government, Labor or coalition, has done this. Over the longer term, the marker of whether super is working is if we have a lower overall reliance on the age pension. The projected 80% of people taking the pension after almost 60 years of compulsory super does not pass the credibility test. We need to increase our savings rates, both compulsory and voluntary, with a view to getting pension reliance down. And taxpayer support for super must be consistent with the objective of more of us being able to independently fund our retirements. We should focus on Middle Australia, the bulk of the population, and those with the greatest capacity to reduce their reliance on the age pension. Super can be improved at no cost to the Commonwealth to ensure the sustainability of the system and deliver these higher retirement incomes for the majority of Australians. Today, we urge the government to adopt a 6-point plan for super. Give every Australian saver cast-iron confidence in the system. Take it out of the budget cycle. Stop the tinkering. 2, define its purpose and make it law. 3, increase the superannuation guarantee rate to 12% by 2022. 4, encourage people to save voluntarily beyond the 12% guarantee by maintaining contribution caps that are high enough to allow women and carers in particular to catch up on their savings after breaks from the workforce. We recognise that an additional 3% would get the majority of people to self-sufficiency. 5, provide tax concessions which give all Australians, most particularly middle and lower earners, an incentive to save. And 6, increase the preservation age in line with increases in the age pension and life expectancy. Now, if we follow this plan, new analysis by Rice Warner actuaries demonstrates that the super system will achieve its objective. The present value of our age pension liabilities will be reduced by 60% for Middle Australia by 2050. By cushioning future generations against the cost of an ageing population, it's more likely that the living standards that we enjoy today will also be enjoyed by our children. This is why, in our view, we must take a long-term view of any superannuation policy that's announced in coming months or perhaps weeks. Thank you very much.